was beautiful. Thank you so much for that opportunity. So we are moving from, right, just to review, we're moving from that first house of knowing, right, into that second house of receiving, ultimately, right, security and abundance and wealth there, and really value, self-worth, how we value, put a value on things around us, how we put a value on ourselves. And then this brings us into, the third house of Gemini, which is ruled by Mercury and which is an air sign. So we want to think circulation. And this is really about our close relationships, close community, the people and the places, the things that are around us that are kind of a little more within reach versus those things that are foreign and very far away. So yet again, we have another example of the zodiacal wheel. And so we've moved into this third house, and sometimes it's helpful if you have a better understanding, or maybe you have more people in your life, or maybe you yourself, like Valerie and myself, we are Sagittarius, and Sagittarius is this ninth house. And what you have in all of these houses is you have the opposition, right? The house that is opposite is going to oppose and be, right, like the balancing polarity. So if we think of that third house in comparison to what we're really studying here, which is Jupiter, which is that great sense of expansion and exploring and philosophies. And, when you think of philosophy, it's almost like a feeling versus third house, which is a bit more practical and a bit more like, say, scientific, and 1 + 1 = 2. Whereas in that ninth house, we might be a little bit more into philosophizing about, does 1 + 1 = 2, right? So it's these different types of energy. It's a very mental activity, thinking, communication, ruled by Mercury. And so what we'll learn here today, what we'll kind of go through, is seeing how Jupiter, like what does Jupiter want to expand in this third house, right? And this third house expanding, and not just expanding, but you can also think of Jupiter, if we haven't said this yet, really just bringing the blessing, right? Like what does it want to bless in this house? And a lot of that is relationships that are very close, not necessarily intimate partnerships, but think of familial, family relationships and like family community relationships where we live. And Jupiter moving into this house to sort of highlight the benefit of that there might be sort of resources that we've overlooked, right? Resources that we thought we wanted to get elsewhere, but are actually right there within our community. So things that we need, or things that we're working to create. And you can see down here, it says, I think, as the mantra, and it also says immediate environment. Right, so everything that is close versus that ninth house, Jupiter, Sagittarius, which is like always looking towards the horizon, always looking towards, right, the center of the cosmos, like wanting to go the most far away to kind of find the thing, or dreaming about the thing. It's more about what is actually around me. And so this is Rachel's chart. Rachel is tuning in a day late with the recording. So hello, Rachel. And she, as you can see, if we find our little Jupiter glyph, is right here. And this is the Aries, right? Jupiter is in Aries. So this is her Aries house, which is the third house here. And then I've started to add, and I went through everyone's chart and kind of re-added this on the right-hand side, which also just sums up the house positions. So you can also see here, oh, okay, her rising sign is Capricorn, her third house is in Aries. And then these are planetary positions. So her sun is in Aries, also in the third house. So without going too deep into like the mathematics of the chart, we can already start to see that there's going to be like quite a frequency there for her, right? Sun in Aries, and then also Jupiter in Aries. So you can kind of imagine those like tones, right? Like they're tones, they're colors, and they're coming together. And so for the next year, there's going to be a lot of fire and expression and expansion, depending on what her focus is. But it's there, in a certain sense, if we're aware of it, it's there for the taking. Even if you don't totally understand the full scope of the chart, you can get a sense just by studying, just by knowing that, this bottom half of the chart, we're a little bit more connected here in the practical realm. This upper chart, as we've said, is a little bit more in that outer realm, a little bit more visionary, dreamy, kind of a little bit terrestrial in some of those houses. And you can just see kind of the difference in personality. And you can also see where we might balance each other as well, where you can complement, right? Because her things are a little more on that bottom sphere. Oops. And mine is all on the top, if that tells you anything. So let's see here. So Jupiter in the 3rd house. The effect of this transit is to increase your contacts through and within your immediate surroundings. You will not have to go very far from your everyday world to find experiences that expand your perception of the world and increase your level of consciousness. This may manifest itself in several ways. So again, we want to remember that Mercury, that Gemini, it's very mental, right? It's very sort of in a certain frequency of mental thought and perception. So Jupiter wants to come in and begin to create a little more space in there. First of all, it is quite likely that through your everyday life, you will receive an opportunity for advanced training in a field of study that could be useful to you. Your concern with communication will increase, and you may do some writing, even if that is not one of your usual activities. During this period, extended travel may be necessary for some reason, but you will come out of it understanding a lot more about your world. Your relationship with relatives, brothers, sisters, cousins, etc. will be very good. It is quite possible that you may receive some kind of financial benefit from one of them, but that is not the only way they could benefit you. Perhaps more important in the long run is the possible effect of this transit upon your mind and consciousness. Old thought patterns, attitudes that you have adopted more or less unconsciously, or that you don't think very much about consciously, will be broadened and expanded. Your thinking will be less subject to the limitations imposed by these attitudes. Consequently, your attitude toward the world around you will be much more generous, understanding, and tolerant of other people's differences. You are less likely to be influenced by prejudices. Instead, you will want to know everything on the basis of your own experience. Your plans for the future will be larger and more expansive. You will realize that many of the limitations that you thought were imposed from without are actually self-imposed. So that's like a breakthrough in how we see ourselves. Also, in looking at the world, you take more factors into consideration and plan more effectively than you might at other times. Just be careful not to go to the opposite extreme and overdo it. And don't commit yourself to projects that you cannot possibly fulfill. We'll repeat that one more time. Don't commit yourself to projects that you cannot possibly fulfill. As a general rule, communication with others is better than usual now. You are able to say what is on your mind, and you are less subject to failures of communication. At the same time, you are frank and willing to talk about every aspect of a given problem, whether it relates to your emotional life or to some situation in the outer world. All right. So, thinking of communication, right? Thinking of those sort of close community relationships, how we carry ourselves into that, how we maybe share our resources, how we share our projection, right? That projection, those resources all coming through the 3rd house. And then also this blessing of family, like being able to maybe communicate a little bit better with our loved ones, or maybe people that we've even lost touch with that come back into our lives. You can think of Mercury retrograde, how that is always bringing back, right, like those old ghosts, old relationships. And as we elevate and we become more harmonious within ourselves, being able to then maybe repair conflict, or right, like have the pieces come together in a more harmonious way. Because where we're headed into that next fourth house is all about home, right? It's like all about like home and the internalization of our being, and being very much at peace in that sort of inner world of our lives. And we'll get more into that tomorrow, but generally speaking, right, this is kind of like that gateway, that third house gateway into the fourth, where we can just begin to feel a little bit better in our relationships and honor those experiences. So we're going to work on a meditation today.